in Genesis, there's God, and it's God the Father, which implies something like a structure, like a patriarchal structure. That might be one way of thinking about, like a hierarchical structure. It's not surprising because God would be at the pinnacle of the hierarchy. And there's the Logos, which is the word that God uses to create order out of chaos. And so there's God, and there's the Logos, that's the word of God, and then there's the chaos. And the chaos is tohu vabohu, or teom. Those are the original words. And they're derived from older words from Sumeria, from a word Tiamat. And Tiamat, or Tiamat, was a Sumerian goddess, a dragon, like a subterranean, an Ophidian monster who lived in the salt water, or who was the salt water. It's not exactly clear. And she was taken apart by the Sumerian creator god Marduk, who was a hero type like Beowulf, or like Bilbo in The Hobbit. It's Bilbo in The Hobbit, isn't it? Or is Frodo? Doesn't matter. It's one of those little hobbits anyways. And he confronts Tiamat, who has decided in a justifiable fit of anger in some sense. I'll tell you the whole story. Tiamat, there's two gods, Tiamat and Apsu. Tiamat is the goddess of the salt water, and Apsu is the goddess of the fresh water. And as far as the Sumerians were concerned, there was the land, and underneath the land there was fresh water, and underneath the fresh water there was salt water. And the world was a dome on top of that. And that was the same conceptual world that the people who wrote Genesis lived in. And it's kind of how the world looks. If you go outside in a field, it looks like there's a dome, there's some ground. If you dig down, you hit salt water or fresh water, and then, surrounding that, there's salt water. And so that's the world. And they thought of the salt water and the fresh water as God and goddess, salt water being the goddess, fresh water being the god. And that it was the union of Apsu and Tiamat that produced the first generation of children gods. And they were active, sort of proto-human creatures, greater than human, but human-like. And they made an awful lot of racket, and they were very careless, and they killed Apsu. And then they tried to make their abode on his corpse. That's a very smart idea. As Apsu's, you could think about him as the representation of the patriarchy, society itself. And the idea that the Mesopotamians came up with in this mystical, dramatic way was that we're careless, we tend to kill our society, and we try to live on its corpse. And that's exactly right. And it's always been right. And that story is thousands of years old, and it was a foundation story for a very sophisticated civilization, and it still affects the stories that we live by today. And it's a brilliant idea because, of course, you were handed your society, and you may be doing everything you can to derive as much benefit as you possibly can from it without contributing to it in the least. And so it's something dead in that it's the past, and it's something that you can, what would you say? It's not manipulate precisely. You can exploit. That's your privilege, that exploitation. Anyways, they kill Apsu stupidly, and that makes Tiamat very mad. And so she comes back and says, well, I'm just going to wipe you all out. It's like the flood. It's the same kind of story as Noah and the flood, which is also a very common kind of story. And this new god comes up. His name is Marduk, and he has eyes all the way around his head, and he speaks magic words, both of which are very important features, because the fact that he has eyes all the way around his head means he pays attention. And the fact that he speaks magic words means that he's a master of communication. And he goes out to fight Tiamat, and he's successful. He cuts her into pieces, and he makes the world. And so she's the goddess of chaos and destruction, the goddess of nature. And the idea is that entity that confronts the chaotic unknown, cuts it into pieces, and makes the habitable world, which is exactly right. It's exactly right, It's exactly what you do. And that's what I want to get at, if I can get to it, because it's hard. It's a hard story to tell. Anyways, that story is at the bottom of the story of Genesis. And so God confronts the tohu vabohu, or the tehom, with logos. And logos gets elaborated over the course of centuries into a very complex idea. First of all, logos it turns into Christ, which is a very strange thing. So there's the Christ in Christianity who's there at the beginning of time and then is incarnated in history and is there at the end of time. It's a very strange notion. So something that's eternal and is always there, but also incarnated in a specific time and at a specific arbitrary place, right? So it's this principle that is also, so it's universal and eternal and also local, both at the same time. Very, very important idea, and very much relevant to what a human being is like, as far as I'm concerned. And God uses the logos, the word, and he interacts with the tohu vabohu, the chaos, and he generates order. And that's what happens in Genesis. And he generates order over a number of days using the logos. And every time he generates a new form of order, so each day, he says, and it was good. And so that's interesting, because, first of all, it's not obvious that it's good. That goes back to the comment that Slavoj Žižek made. It's like, here we are in this being that's being constructed in this reality, and it's very difficult reality. Human beings are for us, our lives are bounded and limited. We're mortal. We suffer. And if we suffer enough, injustice, or justice even sometimes, if we suffer enough, it's very easy for us to turn against being and to curse it. And it's not surprising. And this is why Zizek's words hit me so hard, because when he said that suffering could become so intense that even God himself would have doubts about the benevolence of himself, in some sense. That's what that moment means on the cross. It's like, well, what in the world would you expect from mere human beings? And so, but there's this insistence in Genesis that things that are created as a consequence of the logos are good. So first, that they're created by the logos, and second, that they're good. And so that's a very interesting set of propositions. So the logos is something like truthful speech. And so this is partly what makes me a free speech advocate, because I don't think that you can get to truthful speech without, speech is dialogical. What you don't know much, and you don't know much, and neither do you. Like, we're full of biases and blind spots, and even when you're trying to formulate your thoughts clearly, you're not that good at it, especially if you're thinking about something complex and chaotic and unknown. And you're going to have to stumble around madly and make all sorts of mistakes to make any progress at all. And with any luck, you'll be able to talk to other people, and they'll be just as clueless about it as you, but out of that dialogical process, if you're actually trying to communicate something approximating the truth will emerge, and hopefully the truth will set us free as it's supposed to and put us on the proper path. You see, the thing about the collectivist types at the universities, they're very interested in shutting down free speech. But you have to understand that it's not because they oppose the views of the people that they're trying to shut down. It is that. But it's because they don't believe that there's such a thing as free speech, because they don't believe that there's such a thing as individuals. They believe that you're just the avatar of your group, and that whatever your opinions are conditioned, socially constructed. And the reason they're socially constructed is because you're born in a certain hierarchy of identity, and that hierarchy of identity has conditioned every single thing you say. So you might think that you're expressing your opinion, but if you're a postmodernist, you don't have an opinion, because there isn't a you. You're just the mouthpiece of your privilege, or your lack of privilege. And so the debate on campuses isn't about who should speak and who shouldn't speak, although it does degenerate into that. The debate is way more fundamental than that, and it is, well, whether there is anyone who has anything to say, because the battleground for the postmodernists is nothing but identity groups at war with one another for dominance, and that's it. And so this war is way deeper than you think. It's not who should speak. It's whether there is such a thing as free speech.